Vallecitos Water District for Monday, July 23rd. Item 1, solar feasibility report.
All right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so let me introduce Kevin Ross. He's with Terra Verde Environmental, and but before I get going on that, you may recall we did a brief presentation of the feasibility report analysis, but we didn't have the report at the time to share. So this meeting is kind of the follow-up. I believe the committee members were provided the executive summary, and literally hot off the presses, ink's still not quite dry, and I got the copy of the report that we're going to be going over. Staff will be going over later, but today Kevin's going to be going over the findings of the report, which are basically summarizing the executive summary, and we're here to answer questions.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, James. So the executive summary we actually put together just as an overview of our study process, what we were looking at, what we were looking for, and a summary of the results of both the technical analysis, which dealt with looking at the physical site involved basically the district's properties and the district's electrical loads, and looking for a match where we might have large electrical loads with the availability of open space, preferably undeveloped land that is not encumbered with CEQA issues or other issues that would prevent building an array. So there was that weeding out process, if you want to call it, to find that grouping of candidates that would fit that criteria, basically having availability of space to install solar without obstacles or significant obstacles or costly obstacles, as well as having a large enough electrical load where we could offset it, preferably with a net meter project. And for those that aren't familiar with net metering, basically that's it's a California law that allows anybody who has a solar project, whether it's residential or commercial, to send energy that's not used by the facility or the home or whatever it happens to be to the grid for credit, and that then provides an offset to normal utility billing. So it basically has a dual function. One is the idea is that solar energy reduces your consumption, offsets your actual consumption, and for that period of time where you may be producing solar energy and not using all of it, the meter is a bidirectional meter, so it tracks that energy that goes back out on the grid, and then in this case SDG&E provides a credit, or it's also referred to as a true-up on your monthly billing for that what's known as net energy metering. We also refer to it as NAM, and it's referred to that abbreviation in the report quite a bit as well. There's another tariff besides the net metering tariff that we look at as well. It's only available for public agencies, commercial projects, where you don't necessarily have to have a one-for-one relationship between electrical load at a particular site and availability of area, whether it's a rooftop or ground or parking lot or whatnot, to build the solar. Basically what it allows is building a solar on district-owned or leased property, again, large enough to size a meaningful size array, and then send all of that energy to the grid and then receive credit from SDG&E in the form of bill credits that go directly. These are monetary credits rather than sort of energy credits, a little bit different than the net metering credit, that then go directly against other district SDG and accounts meters on a 30-day billing cycle. So you collect these bill credits that are sent to the grid via the generation system, and again SDG&E tracks those, and the district defines how those credits, it's basically a bank account, if you will, of monetary credits that the district decides what the allocation is going to be spread across its portfolio of SDG meters. So two similar yet very different tariff schemes that provide pretty good cross-section of opportunity to implement solar. And the RES-BCT project, or RES-BCT tariff, came out of state law starting in 2009, I believe, to address those situations where public agencies don't always have a good fit for net metering. And so that's sort of the alternative plan B that we always look at for situations like this where there wasn't a good match of site logistics and load. And what we found, just to cut to the chase, and the executive summary has a pretty good summary of this information with respect to the economics and the projected savings associated with these projects, is a net meter project at the lift station number 1 site over on San Marcos Boulevard. And the reason that site has good criteria or attributes is it has a fairly large electrical load there at the pump station that's located there, as well as immediately behind the pump house, about 2.5 acres of open, available, graded, fenced, drained property, which would make, if the district could utilize that space for solar, for the life expectancy of a solar project, and we're talking about 25 years as a typical life. In other words, if that area is not being used, say downstream for some other facility-related or CIP-related activity, then certainly that site makes good sense, and our projection of savings based on the current rates and time of use periods is a little over $1 million of direct bill savings associated with building a project that would be optimally sized, and would only take up roughly 1/3 of that 2.5 acres that currently exists there.
That $1 million over what period?
25 years. Yeah. And that would be under a cash purchase scenario. We also looked at different financing options, comparing district-owned with a private third-party owned, which is a power purchase agreement scenario or strategy. The latter is a financing structure where the private third party is the owner and operator of the power plant. There is no capital involvement by the district to enter into that agreement. Basically, those agreements require that all of the energy that's produced by the system is procured and billed for by the provider owner to the district on, basically it's like a secondary monthly utility bill based on a negotiated rate, typically a fixed PPA price with no escalator over the term of the agreement. Those terms normally are about 20 years, but they can be as long as 25 years.
And if it wasn't fixed, it would at least be known. We'd have some kind of.
Exactly. Yeah, it's always negotiated. The price is always negotiated. The interesting thing is that in the California market today, there are a number of top-tier PPA providers that have both the financing wherewithal to design, build a project, and then also offer very competitive terms to off-takers, which are the folks that are utilizing the energy at the site. And all of the NEM credit benefits as well, retained by the district. So in the event that there's net metering associated with the project, that is reflected directly in your SDG&E bill, the positive. And we include an analysis of that. So basically what we do is we take 12 months of 15-minute interval data, the most current 12 months, and look at what your operating profile is for that pump station. And that then discerns, again, with an optimized system size, how often that system may in fact generate electricity that's not being consumed by the operation and generating credit through the metering arrangement. So we looked at two different financing scenarios, the direct procurement versus the third party owned. And then we also looked at an RSBCT project. RSBC stands for Renewable Energy Self-Generation Bill Credit Transfer. It's also known as the Aretha Franklin tariff. Anyway, it has a slightly different calculus for how the monetary credit is arrived at. It's not full retail credit like the net metering tariff is. It's based on the energy generation cost component of whatever time of use rate happens to already be in place at the site where the solar array is going to be installed. So basically what that does is it provides a basis for how the utility values these credits. Keep in mind that all of that energy that's produced is going directly to SDG&E's distribution grid. So they need to have a basis for valuing those bill credits from that point where it enters their grid. And the tariff rules surrounding that specify that you pick a convenient interconnection. Usually you don't have a choice. It's whatever meter happens to be there. In this case, we're using, I believe, the North Twin Oaks pump station meter as what's known as the generating account, and that's the meter, the SDG&E meter that has a certain time of use rate schedule associated with it. You see on your monthly billing for that meter, and then that rate then defines what the value of those bill credits will be. Again, it's the energy generation component of the billing. The billing basically has three buckets of cost components. One is the generation component, the KWH component, if you will. The second is demand charges, which is the load or the power charge associated with your operation. And the third is the fixed costs associated with providing transmission and distribution, fees, taxes, all of those costs. So, again, the bill credits are calculated on that first cost bucket, whereas the DEM credit is calculated on all three cost buckets.
That generating account, I thought it was more important that it's the location, but it's also the character of the load in that.
It's a combination of, well, certainly, if we're talking about a power purchase agreement, bigger is always better. So assuming that there's a large enough portfolio of meters that the district has.
The benefiting accounts.
These are the benefiting accounts, exactly. What we do is we cherry pick the operating profiles we look at every meter in the district. And then we pick those that have, number one, relatively high use. So they have a big load. They can't be served by solar, usually for logistical reasons, as we just mentioned. And that then begins to define when you start grouping these together. In this case, for a project that would fit that location within the space constraints that exist there, I believe there's 12 or 13 separate meters from the district portfolio meters that would receive these bill credits, and the allocations would be percentage in dollars.
And how big of a system was that?
That was 2 megawatts. Yeah.
2 megawatt system on.
Yeah.
And that would pretty much fill up both tanks, the roofs of both tanks.
Yeah. And we go on those earthen caps that are above the tanks.
So how many accounts are there total?
I don't know our total count.
A lot of them are very little
Small,
use or
yeah.
no use at all,
Sure.
so if you're talking about the total number, it's probably 50.
So
But if you're
taking
talking about
15
actual,
out of 50.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
that
there's,
sounds about right, actually.
yeah, I think probably half of that are meters that you'd actually want to consider for, solar, it's either a NEM or an aggregation strategy using this export tariff.
So we had Twin Oaks, we had the NEM project of LS1, we had Twin Oaks. Those were the top really two projects.
Correct.
They did look at Lake San South Lake, but it really isn't a good location because the hills are to the west and to the south. It's in a hole, and the
It's
way
got a
the-
lot of challenges.
and the lake itself is not really a big open lake, so it kind of jets off in the directions, so it gets shaded fairly quickly. And then the other one that was looked at was Mar Reservoir as
Mhm.
a possible resident project. But with floating solar project, it's more costly. And if we did the Twin Oaks, we were running out of meters to provide enough load. Because technically we could put, I think, 1.5 if we covered the whole lake.
That remains to be seen. I mean, that was a rough estimate based just on the high water
Oh,
level
yeah.
acreage that
Yeah.
would exist, and that
Then
and
nowhere
that's
nowhere close.
that variability
Uh,
is probably
So probably
far-fetched.
so probably about half of that, maybe at the best.
Yeah.
But again, that'd be something that we'd have to partner with maybe another agency with, because there's a side advantage for shading for algae blooms and water quality, but for us, that's not the primary goal. So.
So when you identify these benefiting meter
Mhm.
accounts, you're locked in.
No,
You
no,
can change.
not at all. The tariff offers a lot of flexibility
Okay.
because they understand that operating profiles change all the time. So
It
you're
started out annually.
It's annual, it is annual. And in fact, there's sort of, I guess, almost an infinite number of changes you can make leading up to when you finally,
Permission to operate.
get your permit to operate. So typically what we did actually, this is another point that is covered in the executive summary, is because the CPUC was very interested in helping the IOUs with the current changes that have occurred statewide in demand, partly due to excessive amounts of solar energy already being present and on the grid, particularly midday. And the fact that as the state continues to increase in population, the bulk of the demand has now shifted, and in the process of shifting has also gotten greater in the late afternoon, evening hours, basically and as we know, the climate is getting hotter and hotter all the time as well, which with air conditioning loads and whatnot, this is started to be a problem for the California system operator and the utilities to deal with. And so the PUC has granted the utilities, and it was SDG&E who was the first one that was allowed to adopt this decision of changing the definition of the time of use periods. So for many, many years, at least 10 or more, the periods that SDG&E uses for defining what the cost of energy is going to be at any given time during the day have been fixed and not changing. It was pretty easy to, if you had a solar system either on your home or at your business or wherever, you could fairly easily calculate what the benefit would be because those time periods were fixed and known. They're fixed and known now again, but they've changed. And not for the betterment of solar, because what the PUC has allowed the utilities to do is shift the most valuable part of the net metering credit in terms of the time of day from when the solar energy is the highest production profile, to later in the afternoon. So it's gone from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m., which was the peak period. Now, between 4 and 9 p.m. is the new peak period. And as you can imagine, most solar projects are winding down by 4 o'clock and are certainly not producing any energy by 7, in the summertime, and by 5 in the wintertime.
So it makes the RESBIT projects less attractive because the credit that you're getting during that time of production
Right.
is off-peak credit.
Yeah.
Because I think it's
Mid-
4.
mid-peak probably.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's either mid-peak or off-peak,
Mid-peak,
depending
yeah.
on which utility and which time of use.
Summertime
rate
is
you're
4
talking
to 9, right? 4 to 9 is now peak times, so you get a little bit of that just at the end.
about. Yep,
And wintertime is 6 to 10.
Right.
Is peak time now. And there's no solar at 6 to 10 in the wintertime. So,
so that was implemented effective January 1st of this year in SDG&E territory, and it will be implemented in SCE territory sometime in 2019. They're in the middle of their general rate case with the PUC now on this issue and some other issues. So to allow a certain amount of fairness, the PUC allowed people that already had solar projects in place to basically allow them to grandfather on their billing the meter where their solar is interconnected. For residential solar, that would be the home meter, and that they would allow that net metering credit to continue at the 2017 periods as opposed to the new 2018 periods. And the same thing applies to commercial customers, with one even better caveat, and that is that instead of 5 years of grandfathering, they're allowing 10 years of grandfathering, which when you plug all this into a savings pro forma for either a NEM project or an RSPCT project, it has a pretty meaningful added benefit. So the PUC allowed anybody who had a project beyond having existing projects already operating, for those folks that either had a project that was in progress of being installed or was under consideration and had no work done on it at all, even any design work. As long as those projects had submitted an acceptable interconnection application, in other words, so that the project looked like it was going to happen, and it now becomes part of the projects that are on SDG&E's radar screen for the coming years, they would allow those entities this same grandfathering provision.
Kevin, we went over a lot of stuff in that presentation
Okay.
that we provided. So
Okay.
the two sites are the Twin Oaks site and the Lift Station 1 site.
Right.
That we grandfathered in for 10 years to 2027.
And so is there a date that you gotta get the interconnection in?
Yeah, so we did. We got them in
Okay.
before the deadline. The deadline was year end,
December 31st.
2017. So basically, the PUC gave everybody 60 days, and there was a flood, as you can imagine, of applications that went into all the utilities. And then it took them a while to go through the process. And we have since now, fast forwarding 6 months later, had those interconnection applications reviewed through SDG&E's planning department, and we have the results. And the results of those studies are now baked into both of those project economics as well.
When does the 10-year start?
It starts when.
January 1st of this year.
Well,
Okay.
it starts technically in terms of the operation of the system, and that's really what counts in terms of the benefit you see on your billing,
Right.
is at PTO. So when the system is built and allowed to operate by SDG&E, that then defines
Okay.
day one.
Okay, because
Okay.
yeah, in the presentation it said grandfather to 2027, December 31st.
Yeah, so it ends
So-
officially for all public agencies with the exception of school districts, which get another 6 months. But for you, it would be July 31st, 2027 is when it would end. And at that point, the new TOU periods for those 2 meters would go into effect. So in reality, if the district were to progress towards potential implementation of these projects, obviously you go through an RFP process and some other activities,
We had 8 years.
it'd be about 8 years.
So let's, the real reason of bringing this forward also is to kind of get an idea from the committee if the projects are something that is, we're looking for, we want to move forward on. And right now, my understanding is really there's the two main projects, is a NEM project at LS1, and there's a question of, you know, utilization of the site at LS1. Obviously, that makes or breaks that project. The other projects is the Resbit project at Twin Oaks, and then the outside project that still needs more development would be a Resbit project at Mar.
Yeah.
So with that, you know, if there's any questions from the committee that we can answer, or if there's a recommendation from the committee of what they would like to move forward, we could work on kind of answering those questions and refining the recommendation in the report prior to bringing it back to the board.
So James, maybe you can take a minute and remind myself and Director Elithar about the phases of the contract that we have with Terra.
Yeah, absolutely. So we basically got the contract into 3 different, and I apologize I didn't bring the contract, but, and the numbers may be slightly off, but 3 different groups. First is this planning effort, and that was about a $60,000 to $70,000 effort, I believe, from Terra Verde. The second portion of it is design. So at that point, if the board says, yes, let's move together on 1, 2, or up to 3 projects, the way it's defined, then we have scope with Terra Verde Energy to move forward on the, basically, the RFP, the request for proposals, and contract negotiations on every aspect of actually getting most likely a power purchase agreement together and getting a developer for that project. And the third portion is helping us within construction of that project, making sure the questions are being answered, and doing any of the paperwork and any of the interactions between the utility, which is SCGE, us, and of course the contract with the power purchasing agreement, whoever's developing that.
Okay, so we're right at the end of that first phase.
We're at the end of the first phase, so now it's a decision of what we want to move forward with phase 2. So in other words, if we move forward one project, there'll be a reduction in the scope. And then if we move forward with 2 projects reduction, but their scope won't reduce by 2/3 or 1/3, because there's a initial setup to do the work, and then we'll just do the other ones to kind of add it on. So
There's a lot of flexibility in how we design RFP processes as well with respect to the results. So, you know, we'll frame with specifications, with hard performance specifications, these 2 projects, and make it very clear to the proposers, this is how we want the information provided. Based on the information that comes back, we can rerun the financial analyses using actual, you know, qualified provider pricing. And then that will then allow the district to discern, okay, well, this project is not as provides as much savings as we originally thought, based on, you know, actual market pricing, but this one does. I'm just playing out some hypotheticals here, but that flexibility allows the district to you know, achieve maximum benefit, if there in fact is a maximum benefit to achieve after going through that competitive bid process.
And I don't recall the numbers at hand, but the NEM project has if it was a cash project, has a more potential quicker payback, because you get a bigger bill credit than the Resbit project. But the Resbit project is a bigger project and still provides for quite a bit of savings, and obviously would be definitely recommended for a power purchase agreement, not a cash funding, because it'd be a fairly expensive project.
Yeah, just based on the capital value.
So Kevin, one of the projects, I think it was when you were talking earlier, I think it was the LS1, you said there's $1 million upside over a 25-year period?
Correct.
How do you put that into perspective of what our total energy costs would be without a solar? So is that 1 million out of 20 million, out of 40 million? How much is it savings?
Yeah, I'd have to look at there's a cash flow pro forma that shows what the energy cost would be.
The tables are pretty small.
And again, that's based on what the rates are today, because our
Right.
crystal ball's only as good as 2018.
There's NEM, I don't know, is that with battery or not battery?
This is with battery, you have the one without.
Uh,
We did, that was the other thing, is we looked at battery storage as well, as a.
And it sounded like the answer for batteries, it's not there yet.
Yeah, it's sort of a maybe with adding it to the NEM project at LS1. But for the criteria that we used, looked at all your meters that had, you know, some sort of reasonable amount of demand. And because of the operating profiles, those locations, and I think there were 4 of them, where we looked at standalone battery storage, it didn't pencil. And that really has more to do with the fact that you don't have these spikes that if you did, like a big air conditioning load coming on in the middle of the day or at the beginning of the day, or maybe a pumping operating profile that had spikes in it. Those types of operating profiles really lend themselves well
Right.
to battery storage, because you can shave that peak off and you see immediate benefit of that on your demand charge savings on your bills. So to get back to your question,
It's easier for me to see on the computer, it's hard for me to read, even with glasses, it's hard for me to read it.
Those are tiny.
yeah.
Yeah.
So this does not show what your energy costs would be without solar. This shows what the benefits are over a 20-year period when you add solar and include that net metering benefit.
There's
Again, based on
There's
today's
about
rates.
$30,000 first year savings. Obviously.
Yeah, so it's
that's
actually,
relative.
Yeah.
this is the power purchase. Let's go look at
50,000
it.
years of the building.
So if the district were to own this, and the capital cost for that project is about $750,000. So the return on that, again, this was based on a system size that's roughly 250 kW per watt at that site and directly interconnected to that meter. The savings, the projected savings, bring you to a cash flow positive position or 100% ROI at year 12 in the 25-year portion. So you can imagine that there's sort of this compounding of savings that occurs in the latter part of that pro forma. So you're really getting very heavy savings after you've paid off your investment. And we did not include a cost of capital in here. We could, if the district had a particular type of financing that they wanted to include, we very easily could integrate that into this to get a more refined.
And you said it's 750.
750,000, 250 kW system, and it would be a ground mount fixed tilt.
Okay.
25-year commitment, at least by the pro forma.
And what happens at the end of 25?
Well, if it's a district-owned system, you just continue to maintain it. I mean, it'll continue to produce power for, till we're all
It's
long
great.
gone.
So you can still get parks and
Yeah.
inverters and.
Absolutely. Yeah, it continues to degrade at a 0.5% per year, to a point where it's, not capable of operating any further, which, solar cells that are produced today, we just don't know how long they'll last.
Right.
The projection that
They haven't been around long enough to
yeah,
reach
so
the end
40,
of life,
50
right?
years.
So,
It's just a matter of, doing preventive maintenance, looking at the inverters to make sure that they're operating
And
correctly.
at the end of the term of the PPA,
Yeah, so a PPA, there's a number of different options. Let's assume 20 years, just to make it simple. At the end of 20 years, the district would have the option of taking ownership of the system for a fully depreciated price.
$1.
predetermined and as part of the.
Well, not predetermined, because the IRS doesn't allow that with PPA providers. Basically how that cost is determined, and it could happen earlier. We always when we're negotiating for clients with respect to PPA providers, we typically require different buyout opportunities during a 20-year contract, and they start at year 6 typically, and then there's another one at year 10, 15, and at the end of the term. If it's the end of the term and any of the buyout options have not been exercised, you can either take over ownership of the system and continue to maintain it. You can ask the provider to remove it from the property and return the property back to its original condition. Or you can ask for an additional 5 years or maybe 10 years, depending on how amenable the PPA provider is, or how well maintained the system's been, or those kinds of conditions. And either renegotiate a new price or maybe continue it at the same price. I've seen it done both ways. Yeah. So you basically have 3 options at the end of term on a PPA.
Unless there's any other questions, we're looking at really 2 projects and maybe talking with a neighboring agency on the 3rd. The project is not ready to bring to the board, but I'd like to get any type of input that we might have to add to the report to kind of finalize that up and help make, I guess, a clearer picture.
Yeah, I think both projects are, at this point, both look attractive. The big question is now it's one and whether
Future
future
potential uses.
they're-
Yeah, that's tougher to,
Yeah.
it's not analyzed in here. so-
Yeah, yeah,
One
especially if it's
more
not clear.
unknown in the
Yeah.
basket of unknowns for
Right.
these projects.
There is an array layout that, with that sort of in mind, and I don't know if this is meaningful or not with respect to that planning process, as we kept the array as far as possible to the southwestern boundary of the site. So, and again, it uses about 1/3 of the total acreage there.
There are concerns, though. It's next to a middle school, elementary school, and high school, and for whatever reasons, shiny glass things are good targets for rocks.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
so,
that could be dealt with as well.
Our ops crews use that property for various
Yeah.
activities as well.
currently,
Yeah.
But the property will shift in use over time, and that lift station is going to have to be there in one form or another. And we will have declining use at a lift station, but not foreseeable for the next 10 years.
I meant to ask you, are there any, I don't imagine there's too many incentives left. for
Oh, yeah,
utilities.
really, that's why PPAs are attractive, because the only incentives that currently exist for solar is the federal investment tax credit.
So they take the.
Yeah, so the idea is
You're-
that the district can achieve certainly a lower cost of energy than they're paying SDG&E in the form of a PPA rate that's fixed and known for 20 years or 25 years, depending on the term of the contract. And they then take that 30% reduction or tax credit that's related to the capital value of the project. There's actually what's known as a tax equity market, where solar and wind tax credits are actually traded actively, and so that would be part of the process.
As a hedge against future uncertainty on the use of that property, what if we decide to go forward with something on the LS1 site under a power purchase agreement, and 10 years down the road, somebody approaches the district and says, I want to buy that property from you and I want to do something with it? How do you, is there a way to buy out of?
Yeah, so that's a perfect example of when maybe a buyout option is exercised in the PPA contract. The district would then, basically the way the buyout price is arrived at is that there would be a professional appraisal of the system. All of the tax credits have already been expended. All of the accelerated depreciation benefits, which is sort of another tax benefit that the owner operator gets, has been expended. So the system, in addition to depreciating, has also lost a lot of its its capital value with respect to the PPA provider. That's included in the appraisal.
Okay.
So most of these cost structures, 6 to 10 to 15 years after this project's been installed, are very good values with respect to the cost of the project. Now, in your case, that would not be a meaningful benefit in terms of continued operation by the district. It would just be a way of getting out of that contract and then maybe selling, the system
Right.
to the used market, basically.
So, what are we looking for from the?
Well, originally it was brought forward in discussion with the board to bring an update of where we are, because we gave the presentation to the board of just saying, here's where there'll be a report update, and then really is to get a flavor for whether the committee wants to pursue one project, 2 projects, or 3 projects, or wants to look at something completely different, so we can kind of refine this before we bring it back to the board for final decision.
On the Resbit project at Twin Oaks, I don't remember savings. Did you have a figure?
Yeah, it's about $4 million over 20 years.
Okay.
And now
20 or 25?
20.
Yeah.
And in
Just
fact,
typically,
we looked at that one only in the light of a PPA financing structure, based on communication with staff that the capital requirements would be, significant enough where it probably wouldn't be a consideration.
And that was 1.5 megawatts?
That was 2 megawatts,
Two,
yeah.
What's the estimated capital cost of that?
The estimated capital cost would be for that project about probably a little under $2 a watt. So yeah, it would be about a little under $2 million.
And we have, for the 3 phases of the project, we have the full amount budgeted,
Yes.
right? Okay. So if the committee and the board decide to go forward with all 3, then there's no additional ask of funds.
Not that.
For the 3 phases.
Yeah.
And
Right.
for the consulting.
Yeah.
For the consulting part,
Right.
that's right.
He's on record.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any, at this point, any reason to shoot any of it down,
Okay.
other than, telling them to shoot.
So what do we do at the MAR site?
Well, with the MAR site, we'll have to, and it's not within their scope to analyze MAR site further. So we'll have to meet with OMWD, see if there's an interest, and if there's an interest, depending on that interest, see what type of work needs to be done, go back to Terra Verde, I'll get an amendment for that, but that's assuming that OMWD would be willing to pay for that additional work.
So I thought our contract, I thought you said that included pursuing 3.
3 projects, yes,
3
total,
projects.
but
And that one's a Resbit too?
it's a Resbit, but it's floating solar and it depends on operation, so it's more complicated than our standard.
It's
in the-
more
in
I
the-
don't guess you can share a Resbit project with another agency.
No, you can't. However, if the district has my understanding was there's a reimbursement accounting scenario or scheme that's used
Mhm.
for
Recycle water sales.
Yep.
yeah, exactly. So for the Meadowlark water reclamation facility, that particular meter happens to be the largest consumer of energy of all of the meters in the district's portfolio. And so there was this sort of chess game going on with what do we do with that meter relative to the fact that most, if not all, of that energy consumption is now going through a reimbursement accounting process for 2 other public agencies. Yeah.
Does OMWD have any land in the vicinity of Mar?
Yeah, they have a tank right above MAR,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but it's they don't have a lot of site around the tank, and
It's a very hilly area.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very topographically challenging.
but unlike South Lake, MAR, the hills are really behind MAR. It's pretty much straight open to the west. However, I don't know if they have a meter or an account that's close enough, and they may at the top of the hill. If it could be OMWD's Resbit project on MAR or something like that. And
Yeah,
those
that's
are
what I was thinking, maybe.
yeah,
there
those
were-
are the things that
Yeah.
we need to explore.
Right.
And that's where, you know, the analysis of their meters is not part of Terra Verde's scope. So,
And we could certainly help them at that opportunity.
so that's, so, you know, one of the things that staff is planning to do is probably schedule a meeting with them to, and with Terra Verde to discuss options and opportunities.
So how does that information come back to either the board or the committee?
Well, if there is additional work, the way I envision it is that if there's additional work, let's say there's a meter that's adjacent to MAR that we could use and it becomes a Livenheim's project, then that becomes their project on our property, which will require a separate action or
Right.
agreement. And then Vallecitos would just be pursuing two projects at that point. So, if it works out perfectly that way.
And then the feasibility of whatever OMWD wants to do, we could help them with that directly, or if Vallecitos wanted to maintain control of that, again, that would be a reimbursement to us.
Meter for that.
So what I'm
thing is
hearing
on
is the
the
majority
cul-de-sac.
voting interest of the
Yeah.
engineering committee that you're on board with the two.
I'm on
for
board
sure.
with the two, and it sounds like we need some additional investigation
On
on
the third.
on the other one.
Okay.
So staff will move forward with finishing up the review of the report for the two, and then we'll go and schedule a meeting with OMWD to investigate the third. Once we have all that information, the plan is to bring it back to the board, unless the committee wants to see it again, but the current plan is to bring it back to the board with a recommendation to pursue one, two, or three projects. So depending on how it works out.
And pursue would be basically preparing, Terra Verde would prepare the RFP documents, specifications, early stage design.
So when do you see that going to the board?
I don't know.
Okay. Rough idea?
Well, really will depend on how quick we can move with OMWD, and I don't have a good control of that. I think the other two projects, based on what I've read, we're pretty much buttoned up on, as Kevin said, 90%. So, you know, with those two projects, we could bring it to the board in the next couple months.
Yeah.
But I'd like to kind of settle up what we're doing with OMWD to see if there's options there before we move forward with anything else.
Yeah, I'm just trying to manage the meetings, because you'll be gone in August, or we have one board meeting in August, that's too soon early.
It won't happen in August.
So maybe,
Yeah.
and I'd like the committee members to be
Yeah.
at the board meeting, so.
Yeah, no, we're looking at closer to, you know, September, October.
Okay.
So, at the earliest.
Okay,
Very good.
good?
Thanks, Kevin.
No
problem.
Thank you.
Oh, Question?
Yeah. Hasn't the cost of power been going up about 5% per year pretty consistently over the last decade plus?
It's a little less than that if you look at it on a 30-year history. It's interesting to note that, and I think this is in the report, it wasn't in the executive summary, but it's in the report, that SDG&E, you guys probably already know this, recently announced a very substantial 5-year increase, 28%. Would occur over that 5-year period, but it's front-loaded so that they would get 18% of that increase in the first 2 years. So that destroys the sort of the standard escalator that we use in our cash flow performance, which is typically 3%, and that was used throughout all of this analysis.
Yeah, well, CPUC, I understand, is given up on the objective of providing reasonable cost power. So that's a big concern. Now, I believe there's a couple of pump storage, water pumping reservoir projects.
Yeah, San Diego
Does
County
that
Water
enter
Authority.
into this at all for Vallecitos?
No, we really don't have the volume or the facilities for
Or the
pump storage.
elevation.
Or the elevation, so those pump storage projects really work well when you have two large reservoirs. And when I say reservoirs, we're talking about lakes.
With a good height.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah,
and
right.
near major transmission
Yep.
facilities.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. They're proposing 500 megawatt,
Oh, that sounds- yeah.
and that'll be years before that makes it through all the.
You also have to remember, you're
engineering.
consuming lots of energy during a pump storage project, so so the scale is really important.
Yeah. Yeah, you just-
Well,
Capturing
Q,
the
I
difference in
think, would have a big
TOU rates.
effect on that. So, Did you put in 3% into pro forma, or was it just flat rate?
Yeah, so we use 3% per year
Mm-hmm.
through the full 20 or 25-year cash flow. That's based on what I just mentioned. It's probably fairly conservative.
Yeah.
Definitely, we feel it'll be conservative in the first phasing, the next 5 to 10 years, and then, but over the 25-year average.
Yeah,
who knows?
exactly. And that's,
What's SDG&E's reasoning on this huge rate increase? Well, I mean, versus, I mean, I don't think Edison's looking at the same
well,
profile of it.
I think they have proposed, they have not proposed a target 5-year increase. Theirs are typically every year, through their general rate case process, and it's been, I mean, this is just, you know, looking at just commercial rates, sort of in general speaking, 8.5% to 10%, recently, and I'm saying within the last 3 years, and that will continue, or at least it's proposed to continue. But again, as it applies to SCE, again, the 30-year landscape is about 3 to 4%.
What is that, what's driving that now? Is it system replacement costs?
It's a number of considerations. A lot of it has to do with this, what's known as the duck curve, which is this phenomenon that we now have with the late afternoon, evening.
So yeah,
periods.
apparently they're giving away power.
They are.
Yeah,
They are.
yeah.
It's negatively priced, as a matter of fact,
Yeah,
to Arizona and Nevada.
So
and
I guess
others.
that's the reason they're trying to go to a more regional ISO
Well,
kind of operate.
and this is one of the reasons why energy storage starts to really make sense, and the utilities are starting to run their own RFPs and RFOs to get commercial, you know, utility scale storage in place that they can use to deal with this, instead of going to the PUC and asking for hundreds of millions of dollars to run new distribution and transmission lines. So that's primarily where that cost comes from.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. Thanks, Jason.
All right, thanks a lot.
Ready to jump into the next one?
Yep.
All right, James, take it away, the groundwater basin study.
Yeah, so this is obviously one of the ones that Director Hernandez is championing.
Yeah,
So,
I feel a little strange.
yeah, same with the solar. But basically, this is just, as you may recall, and I think there was a staff report provided, that this went before the board last fiscal year. Don't remember the date. Do you have that date, Rose?
Yeah, so this was originally to the board there on December 6th. And that's after it went to the Engineering Equipment Committee on November 13th of last year.
From there, we basically finalized a kind of scope of Woodward and Kern, previously RMC. And the idea was, how do we kind of get a foot in without having to fall into the potentially high cost of really figuring out where the basin is. I think one of the goals was to find out how much groundwater basin we have. What's the maximum yield? What's the sustainable yield? What's the legal challenges in this area? However, to do that, when we did the research, we're talking, you know, $600,000 initial and another $1.5 to $2 million to really kind of map it all out. So coming back through the committee process, it was decided that let's see what the potentials are. If we go down with different uses, if we go down with like a desalinate use or a injection extraction use or a conjunctive use with recycled water, and, you know, let's see what grant funding's available and what is possible and how much time will take. So the idea is looking at the different scenarios, looking at this scenario, it would take us 5 years to develop. You know, these are just examples. It would be, you know, somewhere around X amount of $1 million just to do the planning phases, and then you would have to do A, B, and C. Grant funding is available for X percentage, whether it's 25, 33, 50%. And then at the end of the day, you're looking at $4,000 an acre foot water that, and kind of going through when you open a door, where does that door and hallway lead to getting that end product? How long does it take? So the RMC, or now Woodward and Kern study, basically outlined those options, looking at the legal challenges, looking at the basically the three options. I believe there's three options, and moving forward with just evaluating the time, effort, and the potential costs. So it's not actually mapping out the basin, not actually finding how much obtainable yield is within the San Marcos Basin. No real physical work on the basin was being done. So the reason to bring this back to the committee was the board at its meeting did not award the contract. Basically said, let's go find money. At the end of the day, it was budgeted for this fiscal year, and that went through the finance and of course through the board when the board adopted budget. So now that we actually have budget allocated for the project, we want to make sure that the scope fits the goal, and also clarify that the scope is really not going to define the basin. It's not going to figure out the attainable yield, but really, if there is a basin, what's the effort to doing that work? What's the timeline? And just to kind of get a temperature of the committee and the board of how much money, time, and effort that they want to spend on this. I think my time's up.
And what was the budgeted amount?
70?
It's 70,000 or 70. Yeah,
Yep.
70,000 was the budget. It's in the engineering budget. It's not a separate capital item, Director Eltharp. It's
Okay.
because it's a planning study.
Yeah.
So it's in the engineering outside services that was placed in, and then of course there's staff time.
So it would kind of be a sanity check to say, even if best cases existed and the basin was big enough and there's enough natural recharge, or you could put water in there, even if all of that was true, does it even make sense?
Yes, yeah. What's the cost of water? And then basically there's more than one reason to pursue groundwater basin development, whether it's for recycled water, portable water use, or some type of conjunctive use. Cost is one factor, but the water resource reliability is another factor. So it's at the end it's a board decision on whether that higher cost, because it's not going to be cheap water. That higher cost, should we use it for potable water? Should we use it for recycled water? Can we use it for some type of pump storage type of situation? Is going to be a board decision with many studies and updates, obviously. So, and we want to make sure that this first study is just kind of outline those options and outline and kind of give a timeline of level of effort with a cost and a cost per acre foot associated with that. And of course, I won't even call it a 50,000 foot level look at it. It's a 200,000 foot level at it. And they're just going to be using tabletop information in existing studies. So we're going to make the assumption that there's 1 to 2 MGD yield in the basin, because that's what the existing studies from Todd Engineering said, and move forward with that. So even if that's untrue, then it would change the scenarios. But just to figure that out is a several $100,000 effort.
From my perspective, I want to get enough information to decide once and for all, do we want to continue
Yeah.
to pursue groundwater, or is it dead?
Or is it, is this the time to go off the off ramp?
Yeah, and I don't feel that we have a consensus on the board that we've got enough information, so hopefully
Right.
when this comes in, then we can collectively get together and say, is it dead, or is it, if for whatever reason the study shows that, hey, it's only 2,500 an acre foot or 3,000, maybe it's worth pursuing. That's a viable outcome too, but if it says, no, it's $6,000 an acre foot, let's not even talk about it, because we have a potential to increase our desal take it a lot cheaper than that, if that's what we're doing, so.
So, and staff also just wants to clarify that we are not actually doing a physical mapping or physical evaluation of the basin itself, just because that effort itself was it was the majority of that first $500,000-$600,000 scope was just that initial data gathering effort.
And how much effort did Todd put into figuring out it was 1 to 2 MGD?
you know, that's help me out, right? 98?
Yeah, something
It's
like that.
1998 study, and I
Mhm.
couldn't find the original scope and fee. We have the study, but I couldn't find the original scope and fee to know how much
Yeah.
time that took.
Yeah, I was just wondering how much, I mean, what kind of level
Yeah.
was their look?
I got a feeling everything that's been done in this basin has been tabletop. I don't think wells and monitoring systems have been drilled, 'cause I
Yeah,
see no
yeah.
references to that in any study that's ever been done. And we've done 3 or 4 tabletops throughout the history of this district that I'm aware of.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't look like any type of groundwater modeling analysis has ever been done for this.
You know, Dennis Williams sent me everything he had, and it wasn't much.
Yeah.
So, basically everything that we found has been fairly superficial.
So what would the next step be?
Well, we want to basically confirm from the committee that that is what they're looking for, and then the next step would be to obviously update the scope and fee. And once we update the scope and fee, the initial plan was to bring it straight to the board, but if the committee wants, we can bring it to committee first. And that's what direction staff's looking for.
Yeah, I think I feel better since Jim isn't here.
Bring it back to committee.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's okay.
No, it's fine. I mean, he's, obviously, it's no surprise he's the biggest proponent of the project,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll engage with our Woodward and Curran and update the scope, and then bring that back to committee probably after you're back.
Okay, that's September.
Yep.
Okay,
All right, item 3,
all right.
the Rock Springs Award of
Rock
Road.
Springs Sewer.
Yeah, so this is one of those sewer projects that's been on the books for a little bit, and we bid it out and had bid openings, so this is an update to the committee
Good.
for that. And Lito Santos from our staff will be providing us a brief presentation on it.
All right, great.
So, Vito Santos, Cap Facilities Engineer. I manage projects from planning through construction. Today we'll go through Rock Springs Sewer Replacement Capital Improvement Project. Brief history. Rock Springs Sewer Replacement was flagged out from Bennett to Lancer Park in the 2002-2008 Master Plan. 2008 Master Plan, it was slated to be dove into, so we did a planning study in 2009 to review an analysis on how to fix the deficiency during peak wet weather flow. A couple of alternatives and solutions we were looking at is to not just obviously increase the capacity, but to look at the constructability, cost, environmental impacts, and so on and so forth, residential traffic control, all that good stuff. And then we ranked the alternatives, scored them, and we came up with this alternative in orange, which was basically to upsize the pipe in Rock Springs with the 12-inch PVC on Matthews, and then 15-inch PVC line, and replacing that 8-inch ductile throughout the Greenbelt and Rock Springs Road. In blue, we have the drainage, storm drain open channel in the Greenbelt, and with the new alignment in the Greenbelt, we're going to move it out of the open channel and elevate the proposed manholes 2 feet above ground to prevent water intrusion. Some of these manholes in green are actually right at grade, and when we have a significant storm event, our manholes are covered in water, and water is intruding, and mud and all that stuff, and we can't maintain it. So we're going to move it out of there, elevate them so we prevent water intrusion in the future. Let's see. Here's a list of issues that we've had during design. Design started back in 2010. We have a 16-inch high-pressure gas main on Rock Springs that we have to coordinate with SDG&E. We had to purchase right-of-way and temporary construction easements. We have an HOA board, and we're in the backyards of people that are butts up against that the greenbelts. We have an active greenbelt. It's a park area, and we have to phase it out. We also have limited time on Rock Springs because there's a school there. We have limited construction hours. We also have a shallow groundwater table. We found groundwater in soils report that's 4 to 6 feet, so we might be battling that during construction. We also have environmental issues. We have to conduct a bird survey, raptor survey certain times of the year. So, this is also a waters.
Yeah, what time of year is that picture?
This is actually, I think it was just recent.
Is that
actually.
all irrigation runoff? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty perennial.
But
Yeah.
that
Pretty much stays like that.
Yeah,
Oh,
throughout
yeah.
the year it's pretty much like that.
That's a lot of
When
runoff.
it-
It's surprising.
when it
It's surprising.
rains, that whole thing is underwater.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. I was just curious if this is. in
This
the
is
summer.
June, I
That's-
think.
that's today.
This
Yeah.
was just last June, May.
Wow.
So
That's a lot of water.
actually, historically, this area they built it on top of a marsh.
So is it rising? It's just so shallow. Maybe it's rising groundwater. Some of this, I don't know. That's a lot of water.
Yeah. Oh, it's a very detailed picture. So it's only about 2 inches.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not really
It's
that.
not very deep.
that's a lined concrete drained ribbon
That's a
gutter.
30-foot wide swale.
So-
That's kidding. Or about
So,
30-inch wide.
It's a
swale.
brown ditch.
30 foot, 30
yeah,
inch.
it's just a brown ditch. It's just a ribbon gutter. It's not even a brown ditch. It's a ribbon
Yeah.
gutter.
Waters of the U.S.
Yeah. So it's a waters of the U.S. will.
That's why all the raptor habitat, because of that water you always have.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of ukes. So,
Yeah. So as James mentioned, this is the waters of the U.S. and we can't touch it. There's no touch zone, so we'll either have to jack a bore, or depending on the width, the contractor might get brave and dig on both sides depending on his accessibility. So let's see. Bid documents were finished last May. We took it out to advertise in June, and we received bids last Thursday. Our parent low bid right now is at $2.16 million. We have our contingency. This is all the orange is all the construction projections. So we have contingency. ISC's phase construction stuff, special inspection. We'll be doing the construction management and inspection. And then in blue, we have the designing and planning cost. At the end of the day, we're at $3.26 million as a projected cost. And hopefully we're at the budget surplus of $132,000.
How much of those blue ones have been spent already?
That's
All
that's
of it?
spent. That's design and planning.
All of it is.
So
Those last 4 items?
we projected maybe another, $2,000, $3,000 for just, board items or whatever.
Okay.
So, but other than that, that's pretty much.
What's the engineer's estimate?
Engineer's estimate was actually at 2.25 million, so we were barely at 4% within that little.
we got 8 bids. And
Yeah.
the low is 2.1, the high was 2.9.
Yeah.
It was a pretty big spread
Centered over the
between there. And right now, the bid is under legal review. Is where we're at.
Yeah, that's a good bid.
Just getting
Good
bids
projection.
is exciting.
Yeah, getting it done was
Nail biter.
we did a lot of outreach and advertising.
Do they all show up to the bid opening? All
Majority of them did,
Yeah,
I believe.
yeah, I think so. It's a good crowd. Yeah.
They don't show up to anything else, but they usually show up to see who got the
Yeah,
job.
I think we had maybe 5 or 6 show up to the pre-bid.
Mhm.
We ended up having about 15 plan holders and then 8 bids, so.
about half went in bid.
Very popular project.
Yeah, good.
What's the anticipated award date?
We're hoping August 15th.
August.
So depends if you guys can.
See what the lawyer said.
Yeah.
Yeah, how has it been working with BB&K on the construction contract side?
They're very thorough. They definitely assess risk well.
They're very risk averse.
Very
Yes.
risk averse.
Yes. So you may have noticed the board memos are changing, sort of identify all those irregularities, and we really review waive, not waive. And they sort of put that in their analysis when they looked at it.
Good,
Okay.
thank you.
So.
Item 4, Stargaze pilot project update. Oh, did you have a question?
I just had a question. I didn't quite catch the very first thing. This was a line that was identified as inadequate in 2008, and that's why the study went in 2009. So this is added need that wasn't caught previously in the 2002 plan. We're catching up now.
No, basically it's identified in the master plan, but it's identified in the different phases in the master plan. I don't recall what phase it was, but it's basically, it's something that should be done in this current phase, I believe.
So it's identified as soon as the 2002 master plan actually.
Great, thank you.
And,
Good. All right, so Rock Springs is a project we're getting out and starting soon. This is an update on a project that is currently in construction. So you may recall, this project has 2 site locations, one up on River Run Circle, which is off of Fulton, and then also Stargaze Court, which is a street in Promontory Ridge section of San Leo Hills. So just a quick background, you may recall from the presentation during the board award. Stargaze Court has about 730 feet of ductile iron pipe. River Run has about 870 feet of ductile. Fairly new pipe. River Run installed in '98, Stargaze in 2002. We've had several breaks, 5 on Stargaze, 4 on River Run. And so these 2 sites were slated for replacement. During the review, we looked at an opportunity to rehabilitate this pipe. And these candidates at that planning stage looked like they were good candidates, so we decided to move forward with a pilot project, and the board approved that. So, just a project schedule. The board awarded the contract to our contractor Senexon on March 21st. We sent notices to the residents in May, letting them know that this was coming, inviting them to a public meeting. We held those public meetings in June. Construction began June 11th. That was the notice to proceed, so that was when the contract time started, 100 calendar days. That's when the clock started ticking. Took about 2 weeks, a little less than 2 weeks for them to install the high line. That actually took longer than they anticipated. They were technically a week behind from their projected schedule. However, they did do some things to make that up, and by the time they actually installed the liner, end of June, July, beginning of July, they were sort of back on track, and then we ran into some equipment delays. So those equipment delays ended last week, and then we get into sort of what we're doing now and projecting ahead. So on Stargaze Court, our current schedule is, and then I don't know if you remember the presentation, but after the liner is installed, we reinstate the services, we kind of put everything back together, disinfect it, switch everybody back over. So that's kind of where we're at. On Stargaze, the services have all been reinstated. We are now working on sort of doing the preliminary pipe reassembly at certain sections, and then later this week we'll begin the disinfection process. That'll set us up next week, July 30th, to make the final connections to the district system, and then switching people over should be by the end of next week. Paving and demo, that's really to be determined. The contract end date is actually September 19th. So jumping over to Stargaze, and remember they're kind of working on these projects sort of back and forth, so crews are kind of moving back and forth. The services have all been reinstated as of today. However, we did just an hour ago learn that some of those services did not, that the epoxy got into the corpse, so they'll actually have to reinstate them from the outside. That happens usually about on 10% of the services. So Stargaze, we got really lucky. River Run didn't. So right now that's going to probably set them about a week behind, so they can make those corrections, and then they can get back into disinfecting the pipe and switching everybody over. So we were hoping, if everything was going well, which it was up until today, that we were going to have everybody switched over by the end of next week. It'll probably be the end of the following week, so one additional week. Again, it's active construction, it's very fluid, so these are projected. So
So
that's,
that when that epoxy gets into the corp stop, and
yeah.
hardens there, and
Yep.
so then you have to replace the corp.
Yeah, so what they do is, before they put the liner, again, I don't know if you remember the video, but they put like a plug or a patch to the surface, and then they pull the liner through, and then that epoxy is kind of squished through. For whatever reason, either the epoxy got behind the patch, or maybe in the pulling process of the liner, it dislodged or it just came loose. We don't really know.
Do you have the sample? Will you show me?
Oh, yeah, this is actually a sample of, as they pull the liner through, this was the end that cut off, so you can kind of see sort of those two liners, the inner and the outer, and this is actually the epoxy that gets, saturates that inner liner, bonds it to the host pipe. And,
That sample's actually from our job.
yeah, this is
Now, is
just
it cured? Is it cured with heat?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. In fact, I'll show you here just a couple of
Hot water or steam?
hot water. So right here, this is them pulling the liner in. Like I said, just to get to this point, they've already installed the high line. They've dug their access pits. They've cleaned the whole pipe. They've put the patches in for the services. Then you go ahead and pull the liner in, and this is them pulling it in at River Run. And it's injected in here. They're injecting it with resin. They're pulling it in. They're pulling it out the other end. They've got a winch on a truck when they do that. And then once that's done, at that end, trucks up here, they pull it through. They hook up what's called a pig launcher. And then using water, they push those pigs through, kind of rounding out the liner, pushing that epoxy through so it's fully, I hate using this word, but impregnated is what the technical term. And then at the end, you can actually see the epoxy squishing out as the pigs get caught in the pig catcher. And then through their piping, they're running hot water about 180 degrees. They've got a boiler truck set up, and they run that for about an hour. And then they kind of keep line pressure on it for about a day. Then it's cured, and then they go into the process of reinstating the services and whatnot. This process, installing a liner, was pretty slick and quick. Everything leading up to that and what we're currently working on has had some hiccups. So speaking of hiccups, so see, these are some of the technical some of the challenges that we've had. And remember, this is a pilot project, so we're kind of evaluating, is this a tool that we want to use anywhere else, any other? So when we look at this, we're saying, okay, these are the problems, challenges we had, challenges. And now as we look at other sections of the district systems, can we make adjustments to eliminate or mitigate these at all?
Opportunities, Jason.
There you go, opportunities. So there were opportunities in the High Line. So again, looking at this, if we were to use this again in the future, some of the things we would look at would be increasing the lateral size for the High Line. This is the High Line here in the gutter on Stargaze, and then these are the lateral connections to the home. And we've determined that those really don't give enough volume to the homeowner. So we would look at increasing those and also protecting crossings for driveways. And look for sections where we wouldn't affect as many residents.
Were you telling me that the water was heating up?
Yeah, we'll get to that.
There's a thermal
Yeah.
issue, it's just
Yeah.
the sunlight and just the overall ambient
Yeah.
temperature.
In Canada, they don't have this issue.
So one of the other issues was deflections and offsets. Those have created challenges for Sonexan, and so we, again, looking ahead, we would look at those pipes where we didn't have those, or if they did, we would coordinate the access pits to coincide with those deflections and stuff to sort of make this smoother. And then the fact that you're working with, which is what we're learning with trenchless technology, it's all very specialty equipment. There's no parts sitting on a shelf here in San Marcos. And the issues that they had last week, parts were coming from Canada, motors were coming from New York. It's all very difficult. So we would maybe look at, if we were to draft some specs, maybe requiring that they have certain spare parts available.
The deflections, offsets, were those known? Or?
Some were known at obvious bends, and some were unknown.
Okay.
Yeah, it was the unknown ones that really created the biggest challenges. So kind of tailing into that, related to those challenges, is then the customer complaints. So the customer complaints have been mainly centered around access ramps, and you can kind of see what we've been doing. And the response was to just install them whenever somebody requested one. If you need a ramp, we'll build one for you. Irrigation disruptions. So what we found out is that a lot of the people's irrigation systems were not working as anticipated. So and mainly it's the pop-up sprinklers. Some work, some don't.
Wasn't enough pressure.
Wasn't enough flow is what we think, and that's why we're thinking that high line sizes need to get better, especially those lateral lines. But in response to those complaints, what we have been doing is requiring the contractor to water the front lawns, and then we sent out letters and phone calls requesting people to supplement that watering by doing their own hand watering. So you can get out with your hose and water your lawn. Nobody likes to do that, which I understand, but that's sort of what we were requesting people to do. And I didn't put this in here, but we also informed them that through as soon as they got put onto the High Line, the consumption cost of water was not being borne by the customer. So the district is picking up the consumption costs, not the ready to serve charge and sewer charges. So again, trying to encourage them to please go out and water, help us water your lawn as we're helping you. And in fact, talking to ops today, beginning tomorrow, we're having our collections crew go out twice a week to do some additional watering. We're just trying to do the best we can to be responsive to their, to the customer complaints. The other issue was, like you mentioned, that occasionally they're getting hot water because it's sitting out in the sun. So in response to that, we're doing more daily flushing. You would think that more water would be running through this High Line, naturally flushing, just people using it, but as it turns out, our customers are fairly conservative.
It's mainly when people are home in the middle of the day and they have a kid that came back from a soccer camp and they're trying to take a shower at 2 in the afternoon.
The water's been sitting there
That
for
water's
hours
been-
in the
yeah.
sunshine.
So we're not getting complaints at nighttime or in the morning time when most of the people are home. It's that middle of the day use,
Yeah. So
which makes sense.
Yeah, so kind of looking ahead, if we were to do this again, okay, we would probably strategize to do this during the winter. Not, and we've had some unusual heat waves, as it turns out, which is just unscheduled heat waves.
Jason, when would we start billing them for the commodity again? Just at the beginning of the billing cycle following the end of construction and reestablishment of services?
Yeah, their billing cycle is set. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah.
And they have, and I have that written down
Because they
somewhere.
don't have AMI, they don't have the smart meters, we could do it overnight. You
just-
may have to wait till the beginning of the next billing cycle.
Yeah, yep, exactly. So I think on Stargaze, it's going to affect 2 bills. It's going to be split. I think
Right.
just the way their cycle works.
It's actually simpler than that. So to hook up without digging up their yard, we remove the meter to hook it up. So the meter read was taken before,
Okay.
and then when
Oh,
it goes
gotcha.
back in, it'll be so wherever it falls in, they're just going to get charged for whatever use was on the meter read at the previous
Okay.
read, and then the next read. So any use in between, because the meter wasn't hooked up, and there's a not lockout tag out, but there's a tag out process to make sure it goes read and given to the correct address
Right.
back. So this way there isn't a big failure in the meter reading. So
And all the water that is being used is being metered.
yes.
So we have an accounting of that.
But the individual customers aren't getting.
No, yeah, it's just coming off of the high lines.
So we'll know at the end of the project
Yeah.
how much free water we gave away.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. So, and I just put a bullet up there for VW response. I just want to let the committee know that we are responding to complaints as they come in, and typically it's a phone or email call that comes in, and typically lead ORI will relay that to an inspector, and usually that inspector, almost 9 times out of 10, will go out and actually knock on the door and have a face-to-face conversation with that customer.
Good.
What's the concern? Do you need a ramp? Is there hot water? Okay, let's get some flushing out here. Okay, what's your sprinkler issue? Let's look at it. Okay, and so that's not going to make everybody happy. Can't make everybody happy, but we're being very responsive, sending letters, making phone calls, having those face-to-face. So. Let's see, budget-wise, so we have a budget of $482,000. Just put a snippet there at the bottom. To date, we've spent about $60,000. We have not paid the contractor yet. Their bill is going to be $383,000. So if I look at the budget of 482 and how much we have to pay the contractor, assuming a 10% contingency, which right now does not look like it will materialize, but if we were to actually have 38,000 in construction change orders with the 60,000 that's already been spent, which we figured about 60,000, and if I project forward the next couple of weeks of what we're going to spend, we're going to end up with about $20,000 over budget. However, if we do not pay the change order contingency, which again, it doesn't look like that's going to materialize right now, we're going to be, no, there's been like a couple $100 worth. So, we should be within budget. And again,
And I'd like to clarify one thing. So the original schedule and the original scope was to do a dig and lay replacement on Stargaze only. So with this pilot project and then this fiscal year, this current fiscal year, we were going to budget for River Run. So originally we were only doing Stargaze, was a $482,000 job. Then River Run was going to be this year for another $400,000 or $500,000.
well, actually, Stargaze was 400,
Sorry.
and then
Oh, that's right.
we basically added the
82.
82,000 to do both of them.
So
So-
even with the overages compared to the original, and even with the customer complaints or the different challenges that we've had, the project from a fiscal standpoint is coming in significantly less than if we were to do a dig and lay job for both River Run and Stargaze. Plus, although the complaints would be different,
Yes.
but there'd
There'd
still
be
be
complaint about
significant-
traffic and,
and
and,
construction
and
getting
dust and
it.
noise and why is it taking so long? You still have those complaints always.
Jason, just for clarity, that second sub-bullet says no contractor invoices paid. Have any been submitted?
No.
Okay.
No, and we talked to them initially and they were pretty much like, you know,
It's just gonna
it's a
bill
fairly
once.
short job, we're gonna bill you at the
They
end.
weren't putting in progress reports.
Yeah, no. Yeah, we asked them if they would, because technically they could have submitted one in June, at the end of June, and they just decided not to, so. So kind of our next step is to try to maintain that schedule we have. Like I said, we got that recent development today with the services, so that throws us a week off, but I have conversations with my inspector about 3 times a day about this job. We're very active. It's actually our inspection supervisor is really handling this project, mainly because it's such a visible project, such a visible presence, so we're really on top of it. There are certain things, obviously equipment failures, blowouts to the services, we can't control those, but we're trying to keep them actively on the job, working to solve the issues. So that's our next step. Scheduling updates to the resident. James would like me to send out a letter to the residents, kind of relaying to them our schedule. So that is planned to go out this week. We are continuing to do updates on our website. Again, dynamic construction, things change almost daily, but we try to project out.
Have the customers been pretty accommodating, understanding? Anybody that's furious?
You know,
Yes and yes.
yes.
You
I tell
always
you
have
what.
at least one.
I tell you what, the residents on it's just an observation on River Run have been very accommodating. Complain and have questions and all that, but they've been really fairly accommodating. And actually at their public meeting, it was almost like all of them. It was 26 homes affected. It was quite a gathering. On Stargaze, there was only maybe 2 or 3,
Your people.
right? Yeah, no, I didn't mean that.
Okay.
Right? No, I'm asking you to remember. It was like 2 or 3
No, there
residents
ended
that
up
showed
being,
up.
yeah, there ended up being like 4 or 5 or 6
Yeah.
at the end, but they're really out of 13 homes.
13 homes affected.
And then some of them were couples that came out, so there was probably
Yeah.
only like 3 or maybe 4 residents at the most that came out.
Yeah, so they're the most vocal. Interestingly enough, several of those residents were on vacations during those times, so came back, didn't know this was happening and came back to this. So, and then we do have one particular gentleman on Stargaze who's just not happy. I don't know how to make him happy.
What's his main complaint?
His main complaint is on, I'm trying to think about a delicate way to say this. He's unhappy with the employment personnel of the contractor.
Well, he was unhappy, he wanted a ramp, he
Yeah,
was the first
okay.
one to run a ramp, and then he wanted something for his troubles, because we're disturbing his daily life. And then he found out that the commodity charge of the water is not going to be charged, and he was happy. And then he was unsatisfied with the contractor's employee, and then
So at the ramp request, we made it. At the the issue with the water, and we're trying to water more, and letting them know, hey, it's free.
Yeah.
So that seems, and then he has an issue with an employee, which we've moved that employee to try to work sort of down the street, not in front of his house.
Not one of ours.
No.
No, a contract employee. And it's just we're trying to accommodate, but there's only so much we can do.
It's a very small street, so we can only move that employee a little bit.
And that contractor doesn't have an endless source of employees to pull
Sure.
from, and we need the project done. So it's what can we do? So, but for the most part, I have to say we're getting a lot of activity. We're very responsive, and the people seem to be appreciative of that. It's a lot of it's just let us know what's going on. Why is it taking so long? Those kind of same type of questions that you'd have on any project. So.
And as Jason already mentioned, it is a pilot project, so it's a learning experience for us on if we're going to use this product, what we like about it, what's the proper applications, what are lessons learned, and staff still has to get together and we've already started that process, but really have to get together and kind of memorialize it and say, okay, this is how we need to use this project, and this is how we need to write the specs, because we were happy with this or not happy with that. I think the overall feeling is we're pretty satisfied with the product. We felt that the execution could be better.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and so we're gonna, like James says, we're gonna continue responding and then doing that post kind of construction analysis. Where does this make sense as we move forward into a asset management type strategy for the district?
So is there a lot of ductile iron up around River Run? Is this
It's all ductile iron. That was what was the dates on that, Jason?
98.
98, yeah.
So is that the same failure mode that as we've seen
Pretty
over
much.
in
Yep.
San Luis?
Yeah.
Yep. almost
So
exact.
we have a GIS map with all the ductile iron failures that we captured. I'm not saying we captured all of them, but we captured the majority of them. And we're going to continue to update, and we're trying to find a trending.
Yeah.
And we're working with consultants to kind of embark on inserting a pipe tool in the ductile iron to, for lack of better explanation, take an X-ray of the inside of the pipe to try and then come back and do some potholing to see if the information coming from that pipe tool is accurate. If we get some level of confidence in it, then we could start doing a rotational process where we do a certain amount of linear footage a year, analyze it, and then either create basic, fixed projects, repair projects for our construction crew to do, or group them together into larger CIPs where we go out once a year and do rehabilitation. And this may or may not be a option for, as far as one of the tools we use to rehabilitate. Now, I'm hoping that if we find a good application and the pricing is right, and of course we refine the process, that this could be a good option for if we know that, in this stretch of 1,000 feet, there's 20 or 30 spots, and making 20 or 30 holes is going to be just as expensive and a lot more disturbing. So, line the whole thing.
Yeah, and then, this is a pilot project. We got a pilot project price to do this. There's a lot of criteria that we're learning through this process, and then there's criteria sort of from the installer as far as linear footage and what really prices out right. So it's just...
Have you guys ever talked to the Ductile Iron Pipe Association, industry?
Yeah. When we started getting failures, they actually came in to talk to us. I didn't have to reach out because they already knew.
Yeah.
So, and the majority of the failures is not a fault of the ductile iron
Right.
pipe. It's more human error, and it's more human error that occurred after the pipe was properly installed. So the pipe's properly installed, Vallecitos walks away, dry utility contractors come in later, and they usually use a ditch wheel. And they went too deep with the ditch wheel, and they ripped the
Ripped the
protective
bag.
coating. And not only that, a lot of times there's actual claw marks on the pipe itself. Not all of them, not all the failures, but a vast majority of the failures that we had initially were all that same scenario.
Like cable TV installers.
Yeah, and a lot of times, especially in San Luis Hills on Sagewood, which we ended up replacing, I forgot whether it was a half mile or quarter mile pipe, the whole road basically. We ended up replacing that whole road, and on that job, majority of the crossings for the dry utility packages were sitting directly on the pipe. No bag, just sitting directly on the pipe. So, and some of the failures we discovered were that, but then when we dug up the pipe to replace it, we actually had to get SCG&E out here to pull up their line so we could put neoprene underneath to actually create space, because when we removed our pipe, their line went down because it was being bowed over our pipe anyway.
What was that, direct bury electrical, or was it conduit?
It was gas and direct bury electrical. Yeah. So they weren't in. I mean, there was red concrete over some of it, but not all of it. The red concrete actually held it up like a bridge in some places. We had like an arch to work through. So, but some of the more recent failures, we haven't seen that in duct iron, and we're still trying to figure out what caused those. That could just be a hole in the bag or a rock at the bottom of the pipe or something to that effect. Improper bedding.
Yeah, I think also the issue is the street sub-base. I think in Stargaze it turns out that, in fact I just found this out today.
CTB?
Lee was telling me it's CTB, and they ended up having I think 27 inches of it, which means they had some, which we think is it was a wet year that year,
Yeah.
right? And when they graded
Well-
that out, they had issues with compaction.
When they did Stargaze, when we did, not
Sagewood.
Stargaze, Sagewood, everything was concrete treated base. And when they built those roads, it was a very wet year, and they had some pumping issues on getting compaction. So they made the contractor, the developer, basically haul out the dirt, mix in cement, and put it back in. And when they did that, they probed the pipe to stay a foot above the pipe, and just poked holes in it.
Punched the bag.
Yeah, and then you add the fact that now you have a hole in the bag, and then you add concrete treated base, and over time, when we brought, I forgot the guy from Jaeger Engineering, but Randy.
Yeah, yeah.
We brought Randy out to take a look at the first failures on Sagewood, and he took samples of the water that was in the bag, and when we potholed for him, so it's not during a pipe break, the water was so alkaline from the leach from the concrete, and it was getting inside the bag because there's holes in the bag, so that just accelerated corrosion, or accelerated the potential for corrosion, as he put it.
Perfect storm.
And I think that's one of the reasons in San Elena that we see more than some of the other neighborhoods.
That's the update on the project.
All right, well, thank you, Brandon.
Was there something else you guys wanted to?
Oh, yeah,
Brief
you want to,
update?
on other items, locker room, right?
Hit escape so I can get out of this. Yeah, I just thought I'd just.
It's 4:40, just to be respectful of the time.
Oh, a couple of photos. Just want to show you that they cut the hole for the opening. They've done all their demo. This is their remove and recompact. That's been completed. There's the compactor down 5 feet down. And they've dug out for the foundation. That's formed. They're trenching and installing the utilities for the sewer, which is for the floor drain and the shower and everything like that. So that's kind of where we're at in the job currently today. So it's on schedule and it's moving along.
And did you want any update on the water main repair on Twin Oaks? I sent something out, and
Sure.
yeah, because I think generally the pipes all repaired, all the roadway repairs are done, with the exception of final striping. We have to let the road cure for about a week, so we got some temporary striping down, but the concrete medians replaced, they've done the pavers.
Pavers were today.
Pavers were today, and the asphalt's done, so it was, the clock started, Thursday at 4 o'clock, and by Sunday afternoon it was all done.
Yeah, I drove across that road many times I had a soccer tournament, so many times on Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah. It's pretty quick repair. The crews did a great job and got a pretty good contractor out there too.
Who was the contractor?
Cass
Cass?
Construction.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Cass Arietta.
Yeah.
Cass Arietta,
So
sorry.
new name.
Yeah.
Cass
Is there
area.
still
Use
Cass, or
Cass
is it just?
for a long
Cass
time.
area.
Yeah.
That's
I've been using them for a long time.
Yeah, we used to use a outfit, although I always complain about it being Hubbard Construction because they were local.
Yeah.
But,
Fly by night.
but you know,
That's-
they sank and disappeared. They cashed out, took their money, and probably living in the Bahamas on a boat
Oh,
called
yeah.
Change Order or something.
Yeah.
No, we used to use Hubbard Construction because they were local. They have their, but we've used Cass in the past also, and have a long relationship. And Cass was also some of the primary contractors like that did a lot of the majors for San Leo. That did a lot of the grading and the majors and some of the major items there. So.
Yeah, they do a lot of emergency repair. They've done a lot of work for Oceanside and the city of San Diego, emergency work, so they're on my short list. I have a short list of contractors I call, and they're on the list. And they've done some CIP projects for us as well. So.
All right.
Very good.
Thank you.
Any other public comment?
I want to commend staff for the way they're handling that relining project. I think they're adapting quickly and they're being very sensitive and reactive and even creative.
Good. Good to hear.
All right.
All right.
With that, I think we're adjourned.